again, welcome. I'm Tiffany Hamilton, Local Agency Certification Program Manager. For today's certification user group consultant contracting training series, we have Whitney Scoville and David Brudnock from ODOT's procurement office with us. They're going to be providing some tips on billing rates and a breakdown of costs. And I'm going to go ahead and let Whitney get going. And the one thing I guess I would ask of the two of you is, how do you prefer to receive your questions? Do you want to hold them to the end? Do you want to answer questions throughout, or do you want pretty much everything to come in via chat?
Either way, like raising hands, I'll try to watch out for raised hands or chats throughout.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on my end, Melissa and I, Melissa Flores, new certification coordinator, she and I will kind of monitor the chat and help you out with that. I know that when you're presenting, it's hard to see the raised hands. Okay, well, take it away.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. I'm Whitney Scoville. I'm ODOT's billing rate coordinator. I work in the procurement office. We sent out this flyer in advance. I hope you all got it. I think that they'll have it as an available resource for you afterwards if you didn't. But essentially, I wanted to go through kind of high level of why we're talking about billing rates and the breakdown of costs before we actually get into any of the details. And of course, it's because we're looking at these A&E or architecture and engineering type firms, and the requirement for procurement is that we look at qualifications rather than price. And that comes from the United States Code down to the Code of Federal Regulations, all the way down to the ODOT billing rate policy. And essentially, because we can't look at price, we want to look at those factors after we award the firm. Once we've awarded the firm based on their qualifications, we can start negotiating scope of work, the schedule, the budget, the not to exceed amount, or the billing rates, and the consultant fee or the profit. And where the outline for what we review comes from is 23 CFR 172, and it really outlines the whole procurement process from the solicitation all the way to closeout. And the little section that talks about the cost portion or the billing rates is 23 CFR 172.11, which points out that we have to review our consultant firm's indirect cost rates, which is their cost of doing business. This is updated annually by all active firms. And then a subset of overhead is facilities capital cost of money, or FCCM. You'll see that for some firms, and it's really related to capital asset purchases that these firms make. So if they're able to make large capital asset purchases, which in turn create returns or profits for them, we really want to keep it separate from their overhead so that we're not applying profit on top of profit. So if you see an overhead and an FCCM come in separately, keep them separate throughout the length of the contract, and then make sure you're not reimbursing any profit on top of FCCM. Let's see. Then we look at direct salary or wage rates. Those are all called labor rates. What my team gets is a full direct salary schedule from the firm, and it includes all of the classifications, the employees that are anticipated to fill those roles, and their actual wage rates. And we take all of that sensitive classified information and turn it into the escalated salary rate schedule. And that just shows the classifications and the maximum and the average rates for each classification. And it escalates those rates forward for 3 years at the 3.5%, which is ODOT's standard escalation right now, which is also applied to the breakdown of cost. Essentially, firms can update these annually, or they can wait till the 3rd year. But the tool is intended to allow the firm or the agency to look at forecasting the loaded rates for the next 3 years, if it's like a multi-year project, or we're at the very beginning of estimating things. So it's really a tool that can be used by the firm or ODOT. The fee or the profit is the next piece, and that's really negotiated on a contract by contract basis. And so are the other direct costs or the direct expenses. So the review of all of this takes place within ODOT. And really the review is it reasonable, is it allowable, and is it allocable? Reasonable would be if I'm paying for the same type of product or service and they're equally qualified and they're providing the same thing, why would I pay somebody 3 times as much or 2 times as much as this person? That wouldn't be reasonable. Allowable, the federal regulations has a whole list of things that are unallowable. So the firm needs to go through and pull out all of those unallowable costs. And if they don't, or if we find some, the ODOT external audits team is actually the group that goes in and looks at all those indirect costs. And so they'll go in and pull out and make sure that all of the costs are reasonable, allowable. And if they find things that weren't pulled out that are unallowable, they might make recommendation to pull those out as well. And then allocable would be just like project charging. You're project charging to different projects. You might also project or charge to administrative time. It's really just making sure you can allocate your hours. And we make sure that firms can do the same thing. So once the ODOT external audits team has reviewed all that information, they give their recommendation to my team, and then we send out the approval notices and maintain all the records. One piece I wanted to point out is that the negotiated billing rate schedule is really intended for new and small firms. We're trying to graduate firms as they get the accounting knowledge and the ability to their own indirect cost rate, because it is the federal requirement that we get an indirect cost rate. Negotiated billing rates aren't mentioned in the federal rule. That's really a subset, an alternative review process that ODOT has created. And then again, mention when we'll go through this when David goes through the breakdown of costs, but that each team negotiates the direct expenses and the profit. And we have a profit fee worksheet that is available on the certified users, certified local agency website, as well as the breakdown of cost templates. And then David's going to go through a checklist as well. And we posted that on the external site as well. All right. And then just high level, this is what it will look like when you apply it to the BOC, but I know we're going to go through that in just a second. Because this information is considered sensitive, we don't post this externally on our websites. So you do have to reach out to our team, ODOT billing rate updates at odot.oregon.gov, and we'll send them out to you. We try to send them out same day if possible. Something that you'll notice that we're working on is getting all of our firms up to compliance so that they are submitting this information annually. So if they aren't in compliance today, I might mention that and then ask you to help me reach out to the firm. And that's what I would do with our internal business partners as well, is if somebody needed this for a contract internally, that I would make sure that we both reach out to the firm, that we're getting the most updated information as soon as possible. And for any firm that doesn't have a rate established, reach out to us. I might ask for information so that I can contact the firm. So the firm's name and their contact information, and then high level information about the project so that I can understand what types of services they're providing to you, and or if you have some type of estimated contract NTE, that would be awesome to know too. And then the last piece on this flyer is just a resource for you and our consultants, is a training on establishing rates. And I know you may not need to know how they establish rates, but it does go through more in detail about direct salary, overhead rates, and all of the different forms that our firms complete, and just the process in general of how the rates are applied and the why, the big why, the why we went through here earlier is where do these regulations come from. So if you're interested, it's linked here, but it's also linked on our external Doing Business with Oregon website for consultants. And it's really just like one tab away from the certified user groups cert resources. So they're found on the same web page, and I can go through that right now. So I did have it pulled up. Wanted to show you all that we updated your website to include the BOC checklist that David's about to go through. And then we added breakdown of cost forms for an internal cost estimate. So that was actually originally just on the required firms for the consultants, but now it's up here as well. But anyway, the resources for the firms and where this training can be found is just 2 tabs above where your information is on the consultant forms and resources under cost, billing rate, and compensation, establishing billing rates with ODOT training. And then all the forms that a firm could ever need to establish billing rates are all right here. And that's what I walk through them each with to make sure that they get the right information into us. All right, so now that we're done learning a little bit about billing rates and why, we're going to walk through the breakdown of costs, and I'm going to hand it over to David.
All righty. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Brudnock. I'm one of the team leads for the personal service and agreements team. And yes, I will be giving you BOC training. How fun. So let me share my screen here. Let me see here. Okay, so there we go. All right, so here we have the breakdown of cost. It is at face value, it looks like a monster, but once you understand kind of how it works, it's kind of it's a little easier to understand. There's a lot of different stuff that has to be filled in, and we're going to go over kind of what each column and each tab kind of goes through here. So here's the BOC, or the breakdown of cost review checklist. That's something that we've had internally at OPO for quite a while now. But anyways, so yeah, what you need for a completed BOC review, you'll need a final negotiated statement of work. You'll need your the type of breakdown of costs. There right now, there's an effort to try to combine the different types of breakdown of costs. So here it says, you know, this one's for the ESR rates, this one's for NBR. The one that we'll be looking at actually has kind of that combined version, which is pretty beneficial. So there's really no confusion on how to put in labor rates and things like that. You'll need your records of negotiations form, and then you'll need your approved billing rate schedules. You can get that from Whitney. You can ask her for that, and she can provide things like that, hourly billing rates, overhead, that kind of a thing. So the general info on the BOC. One thing that you would need to do, and I think Whitney, that as we update our breakdown of costs, we'll be posting it to their site as well. Is that how I understand it?
Yeah, I think they're all automatically updated at the same time.
Okay. So as we go through and we make updates and tweaks and changes here and there, your version will get updated. But it's best to not save a copy locally on your machine. I would say go through and go back to the website and download a copy every time you need it. So that way you're using the most up-to-date version. Because if it does come to OPO and we take a look at it and it might be outdated, you may have to redo work depending on what kind of changes may have occurred. And so contract info, if you have it, if not, that can be added in later. Make sure that your contract number, project name on the BOC matches the contract or amendment. And so you'll be up here. This is where you put in the contract information. If you have a PCS assigned to your work, or if you're doing your own work, put your contract number here. If it's an amendment, you put your number here. If it's a work order contract, you put the work order contract number here and the amendment to that work order contract there. You put your project name here, make sure that it matches and it's correct. So there's no confusion on what's going on there. Your task numbers and names. So this one kind of can trip things up. And this is for the sake of continuity, to make sure that everything is clean on both the contract, both on the contract and the breakdown of cost, that all task numbers and names on the BOC have to match the statement of work and vice versa. They need to be one-to-one. There can't really be any much of a change. And so that way there's no confusion saying, okay, task 1.2 is design on the contract, but we're saying task 1.2 on the breakdown of cost is, meetings or something like that. And so down here, this is where you'd be putting your information, your task number, the task number here, you put your name 1.1, design or something like that. And then your subtask name or your task name would go here. And that's where you'd have to do the, you see, I got it wrong there, but you put your name over here, not over here. Excuse me. So you put it over here, and then, as you go through, you just verify that the work or the contract matches the breakdown of cost. And then contingency task numbers and names and statement of work are listed in the contingency task section of the BOC, separate from other tasks. So up here, we have your non-contingency tasks and deliverables, and this would be everything that that you have to do in the contract. That's all going to go here. And down below, we've separated contingency tasks, for tracking purposes, to make sure that we know how much each one is going to cost. And so it's just that degree of separation there. Make sure non-contingency stays up here and contingency stays down here, and they're all separately calculated, but then added together at the end. So tips for printing the BOC. I don't necessarily think many people print the BOC anymore. It's here for your, for kind of just your information. If you ever need to print a BOC and you need to present it, or, bring it out and do something with it, or want a physical copy of it. I probably won't go over this because it's not very applicable in today's age. But it's there if you ever want to look at it. It's there on your version on your site. So info for each consultant. Make sure when you're putting into the breakdown of cost, you're putting the business name, that is actually their actual business name, or if they're doing business as, there's, the DBA portion of that. And you would input that up here. This is where their name would go, and you'd put that here, and that would be for any consultant and any sub-consultant. So if you scroll over here, there's many areas for sub-consultants. So there's not just, like one, two, three sub-consultants that we have on here. I think it goes a long way. You can find those, they're hidden. You can find those by just unhiding them. And there's a lot more. So if you have like 6 or 7 sub-consultants, there's actual room for that. So yeah, just make sure you're putting for each consultant, each sub-consultant, you're putting their name in correctly as it appears on the billing rates or Secretary of State. That's a good way of going about it. So your COVID certification. So you can go there and you could verify the DBE MWESB certification status for each sub. You go take a look. OCR has been doing that mostly when we want to get approved DBE. They go in and they approve everything. And I believe, if I remember right, that you all go through OCR as well. Is that correct, Whitney?
Yeah, their LPA guide explains it all to the OCR process and who they reach out to. So it's all the same thing as far as I understand. Okay.
So if you ever need to certify on yourself, there's a link here you can go to. You can check it out. You can search for them, see who's DBE verified or MWESB verified. But OCR will be able to see it and approve it, however it works. So for this one, this is for consultants with escalated salary rates. This one you have to do a little extra work to make sure that everything's consistent and everything's clear on the BOC. The job classifications on the BOC must correspond to job classifications on the consultant's ESR. And that's something that, of course, you get from Whitney, and you go through, and it looks fairly, some of them look fairly similar. Sometimes they'll vary, but you just scroll through, and here's where they're going to have their job classifications. It's going to be input. It's going to be sideways, so you might have to tilt your head kind of like that to look at them. But it'll say like project manager 5 or something like that, and then you would go through the billing rates that you receive from Whitney, and you go through and say, okay, project manager 5. Okay, yep, that's on their approved list. Everything looks good. And then next step would be the direct salary rate. You would want to make sure that it matches the average direct salary rate for the job classification for the current year on the ESR. So you'd go through and you would look here, or if you're inputting it, you would take the average of what shows on the approved billing rates received from Whitney, and you would input the information here or verify the information. I believe some consultants will put that information in, and so you might just have to spot check it. And so you put the information here and say, like, let's see, project manager 5 would get $50, and so, well, what did I do wrong here?
He probably wants overhead rate information at the same time.
Oh, that's
if you find those errors, it's likely because it wants overhead rate information, or if you've entered a negotiated billing rate, it's because you also have overhead rate information.
Right. And so,
and I would say too that just making sure that we're looking at averages, because it really should be an average so that they can fluctuate who they're filling in that position, but that we're definitely not going over the maximums that they have approved. And if we're seeing all maximums, let's ask questions about why they're using all maximums. Do they know the person that's filling that role? And I would say sometimes they do propose specific people, and they're called key persons in the contract, and they have to list those people in the breakdown of costs. And that's where you will see a variance from the average, and it will most likely be someone that's higher end on the scale.
Right. And another thing to keep in mind, and it's a good thing you brought that up, Whitney, about the max. Sometimes they'll propose lower than their approved rates. So, say, for example, we got that $50 and they'll propose $34 for project manager 5. Typically what you'd want to do for something like that is to reach out to the consultant and say, hey, did you mean to do that? You're kind of coming down low. Is there a reason why you're doing that? And if they say, oh yeah, we totally meant to do it, this, we're just doing it because of X reasons, then, you take that and you can put it in your file, and that'll be the justification. So if anybody ever goes back and takes a look at the BOC and go, well, why'd they go low here? You have an email or a document or something that explains why they went lower. And that's just for audit purposes and you know, it just keeping a clean file in general. And so, yeah, so for the direct salary rate, so you have your accepted overhead, your FCCM that Whitney went over, your negotiated profit, your annual escalation rate, and your percent of budget. This is all located up here. And this is where you would put your information in. So the accepted overhead rate would be something that, do they have access to that, Whitney, or do you provide that to them?
Which piece are you talking about?
The accepted overhead, is that you
Yeah,
provide them the
they'll get
overhead?
the overhead, they'll get the overhead, the FCCM and an ESR, or they'll get the NBR.
Okay. Okay. So it'll be something that she'll provide to you. And this is where you would input that. And it can vary wildly from 125% to 110 to 90% or, you know, something like that. So you'd put it up here, we'll say 125% overhead. Put that information here. Your FCCM is usually a fraction of a percentage. So you'll see something like 0.33%. You put that there. Negotiated profit ranges usually about 10%, 10.1, 10.2 is kind of getting high. Anything lower than 10 is kind of concerning too, but you'd typically be around 10 point, let's say 3. Oops. 10.3%. You put that there. And then annual escalation. Why? Okay, that's fine. And then over here, your budget multipliers. So if you have a contract or something similar that is going through multiple years, this is where you would put your budgeting. So you have your budget for the current year. You have your budget for the, you know, current year plus 1, 2, and 3. And so, you know, say they're going to do 30% of the work the first year, 30% of the work that next year, and then, you know, however much is left over in current year 2 and 3. You would put that information here, and the BOC will accurately calculate that and allow that and give them the escalation rate for each of their job classifications below. So for purposes, we'll just keep it at 100% current year. And so that now I think I should be able to put in an average. Let's put 50, huh? Let's see if it works. There we go. So here you go. So now that we've put the information up here first, we put all, you know, populated everything we can. We go down and then we put in our average salary rate, and we say $50 for project manager 5. And then you can see what the fully burdened rate that comes out to is $124.25. That is the going rate for that particular project manager 5. So you'll see a lot of numbers as it starts populating. You'll see a lot of numbers start popping up down here, and that's all calculated further down into the BOC as you put in your hours, and as you know, if you have any direct expenses, that kind of a thing. Is there anything you want to add, Whitney, or is that good?
Yep, I think that's pretty good. Any questions
Okay.
so far from anybody?
Yeah, I don't. One of my monitors isn't working, so I can't see if anybody has any questions.
David, so do you want to explain how you're using the breakdown of costs to help develop the internal cost estimate before you sit down and negotiate with the
Sure.
consultants?
Yeah, so when it comes to developing your own estimate, I mean, it runs the same way. If you're going to go into negotiations, you're going to know their accepted overhead. You're going to know their FCCM. You may or may not know negotiated profit. You can put that in. You can, you know, if you haven't done the paperwork, you can put that in. Say, okay, well, I think it's going to be this. If you haven't done the profit sheet yet, and then as you go through this, you just start inputting numbers based on what you know, the historical data or whatever you have at your disposal to create the internal estimate itself. So you say, okay, well, I think this is what is going to be needed. So we're going to have a project manager 5 here. We're going to have a program manager here. Oops, like a typewrite. Manager here. And then we're going to have, you know, a geotech person here, geotech 7, because you'll see that sometimes too. They go pretty high in their numbers occasionally. And then you would guesstimate. I know it's a word that some people don't like, but you would, go through and you would use your best guess on, with the information you have and say, okay, well, I think, based on their, project manager stuff, you put in their direct salary rate, depending on what that is. So, you'd say, okay, well, I think project manager 5, program manager, geotech is good. You go look at their billing rates and say, okay, well, that's going to be $75 here. And that's going to be $25 here. Okay, so you've got your stuff here. So you go, okay, so now my subtask name, let's see, I think, let's see, let's do preliminary design, if I can spell it right. Say preliminary design. Say, okay, project manager 5, I think based on the information I have and the complexity of the work, it's going to be 15 hours for the project manager 5, and it's going to be 5 hours for the program manager, and it's going to be 25 hours for the geotech. And then as you put that information in, it's going to, start calculating down here. And then you're going to get your numbers here. So it's not so much based on you trying to estimate the cost yourself. It's based on the complexity of the work that's going into it. And so you're using the numbers that are available to you from the accepted billing rates. And you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to take my best guess on what job classifications I think need to go into this. And then you're also, using what you can for the tasks that and you're estimating, well, I think it's going to take about 15 hours, 5 hours, 25 hours here, however many hours you think. And so that's going to build your internal estimate. And that's what you're going to bring into a negotiations and say, here's, boom, this is our internal estimate. Well, you may not give it to them, of course, it's probably not a good idea. But something that you would use in negotiations, you would have your jumping off point for how much something might cost in terms of if you're doing architect and engineering or any IT stuff or anything under the sun, really. Does that answer your question, Tiffany?
Yeah, that helps explain how you might use the breakdown of cost as a tool to develop an internal estimate. And really there's 2 points in time that a local agency project manager that is beginning to develop their statement of work and the work that the negotiation for with their consultants might use the breakdown of cost. One would be in initially developing a cost estimate for the consultant contract, and another time.
More comfortable over here.
Okay, I think we need somebody to mute their phone. Thank you. Another time would be after who your awarded proposer is and looking at their actual rates. So initially you might look at number of rates and look at sort of that average rate between multiple consultants that do the type of work that you're looking to put a proposal out on, and use that to kind of build up your costs internally and your estimate internally. And then once you've done your RFP, you've identified who your selected proposer is, then you would request from Whitney or the ODOT billing rates team, submitting an email to them saying, hey, could we get your billing rates? And you could also request the same from your consultant, make sure those things match, and then start refining your breakdown of costs in preparation for your negotiation. And then when they submit their breakdown of costs, because the consultant will also prepare a breakdown of costs, you'll be able to compare your internal estimate to their breakdown of costs and really kind of dial in on where there might be differences between the number of hours that you as an agency have estimated and they have estimated, and that may help you with refining the statement of work, because it could be that there might be different interpretation of what the statement of work means when working with your awarded proposer.
Yep, and I think you brought something up that's good to keep in mind, Tiffany. Is definitely when you are building your internal estimate to look at the different salary rates out there, and you know you can use an average or something in between that to help build that, so you get at least a middle ground idea of what the cost may actually be.
Yeah, and is there are in the audience, because these consultant trainings are intended to be kind of a peer resource, is there anyone attending the training that wants to share an experience that they've had around doing a cost buildup and developing their internal estimate? Your experience, or how this process has worked for you? Well, if you want to share, you're welcome to put some comments in the chat box. But yeah, thank you, David,
right.
for pausing.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Happy to answer any questions as we go. Okay, so yeah, so there's your multiplier section. You can find that on the checklist. It gives you kind of more in depth idea, more information here. As Whitney said, the annual escalation rate is 3.5%. So that'll go in the BOC as well. You put that here if you're going to have multiple years, but we have only 100% on current year, so there'll be no annual escalation rate. And then let's see here. So negotiated billing rates. It's a little different than ESRs, a little easier since everything is wrapped up in negotiated billing rates. They're fully burdened at that point. So what you see here, down here, where it says fully burdened billing rates, where it calculates all this stuff up here. For an NBR, you would not put anything up here. This would be zeroed out for everything. 0, 0, 0. That's all zeroed out. An NBR will never have an accepted overhead. They'll never have FCCM. They'll never have any of that stuff. Although they won't have a negotiated profit, since that's part of the fully burdened portion of the negotiated billing rates. In this one, so we'll zero these out. Of course. Well, anyways, we'll ignore that. I'll jump over here onto this side here. So for these ones, so the job classification, we'll just leave this alone here. You get the idea. Right here, this nice little orange row number 13. This is where you're going to enter your negotiated billing rates. And when you receive them from Whitney, there'll be a nice little list. It'll give you your job classification, and then it'll give you your rate. And then that's it. So you take whatever's in there and you put it down into the orange thing, and you say it's going to be $175 for this job classification. It drops in, and then that gets calculated into the BOC as well. It's pretty easy, pretty simple. Not much else to do there. Yeah, you can see here. Does not they cannot exceed. They have to match. That's one thing to keep in mind for the annualized direct salary rate for the NBRs. They have to match exactly the amount. So with unlike above, where they might meet, or they might go a little lower, or they might go way lower, the NBRs, they have to meet. They cannot go low and they cannot go high. It has to be exactly the number as it shows on the approved billing rates. So your multiplier section, as I said before, everything must be 0, except 100%, of course, in the current year. So everything up here gets zeroed out. There's nothing up here for NBRs. Excuse me, there's construction. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's construction near my house, and it's very loud. Goodness gracious. So there we go. So yeah, your labor hours, make sure you spot check the estimated hours. Use your best guesses. Does it seem like there's an excessive amount of hours? Sometimes you'll find that, you'll find 235 here. Like, why 235 hours for, task 1.2.1? That seems excessive. And so it's that type of stuff. Just be wary. They may have accidentally, pushed a button, or maybe deleted something, or didn't delete something and put the number in. It's just simple mistakes that can add up, and it can greatly skew the amount that your BOC is. I've had something similar to that, where they had 235 hours in one of my BOCs. And as I was going down there, I'm like, why is this so expensive? Based on everything I was looking at, I'm like, this is really like out of control for the work that they're doing. It was some very simple work, and it was the price was way up there. And so as I was going through the BOC, I found something like this, 235 hours. And it was like, whoa, I don't think that's right. So you go back to the consultant and say, hey, I think you made a mistake. And usually they'll say, oops, our bad. And, it's supposed to be 35 hours, or, oh, it's only supposed to be 25 hours. And then that'll fix everything, and everything, everything will look good at that point. But yeah, just make sure you spot check your hours, and make sure you're spot checking, you're spot checking the job classifications and making sure that all the information is input correctly. Yeah, so yeah, does it seem like excessive amount of hours for a task? Does it seem like there's, excessive amount of hours charged against a principal or senior job classification? That happens. Yeah, and here, you've got some options here. You can reach out to the agency contract administrator, project manager, or you reach out to the consultant themselves and say, hey, what's going on? If you're negotiating, that is. So consultants with direct expense estimates. So each consultant that has direct expenses in the calculation section of the BOC must have a detailed breakdown of estimated non-labor direct expenses. So in that, you have over here, I mentioned it earlier, your direct expense area here. And you're going to have this for each consultant and each sub-consultant. And these are going to be your allowable direct expenses based on well, mainly out of the Oregon Accounting Manual. There's a lot of other little areas there, but mainly in the Oregon Accounting Manual, you can find a nice little section that talks about allowable and unallowable expenses. ODCs, other direct charges, that type of stuff. And so this is where you're going to find direct expenses, which could be mileage, could be per diem, could be airplane tickets, anything like that, mobilization costs, that type of thing. So if they have to mobilize to a site, it could be, $3,000 to mobilize to a site out in Malheur County. Demobilization costs, that's a thing. If they have to demobilize for the winter, things like that. Just different types of expenses that are typically attributed directly to the work that's going on into the contract. And so with that, you'll see here, they'll put in information and it'll all get added up. And it'll get added to the amount here. And one thing that you'll have to do is down here, you have all the tabs down here. You have your prime direct expenditure tab here. There's a nice little example. This is in every BOC, and this is not calculated. This is example only, and it shows you kind of what to expect or what might be a direct expense in this case. So lodging, it shows you kind of how it's supposed to be filled out, the sample entries. Here, 2 nights, Bend, Oregon for 2 people. Okay, $81 a night. Not bad. Quantity. Okay, you have 4 of it. You got 4 quantity, and that gets calculated to $324. And so as they put in their information, that's all going to get calculated really nice on this tab. And so you're going to want to spot check it, make sure that you're looking at everything, making sure it's all allowable, and making sure that it's not out of the ordinary in cases like mileage and stuff like that. So yeah, so say for example here for lodging, you want to check the GSA per diem chart. You could take a look at it and see what the allowed per diem is for lodging rates for Oregon. It's pretty detailed if you've never seen one before. They mainly give it by city. So like Pendleton, it'll have Pendleton. And Portland, Salem. Sometimes they'll do counties if it's a special, some kind of special occasion or something like that. But typically they do cities, and that kind is like an umbrella of the area, if you will, to kind of give you an idea of what a proper lodging rate would be. So high per diem rates should include details about location, number of nights, the season they're going, rates. To justify the higher rate. They may be going out at a time, they may be going and doing a site visit at a time that there's a local festival going on. So lodging may be, way up there because, things get really expensive when there's festivals and things like that. So it's just good to keep in mind when you're checking that stuff, saying, okay, well, here's the reason why it's expensive. There's a festival. it's appropriate, we'll just have to pay it out. Mileage, there should be detail, number of miles, the number of miles, reasons for trips. So if they're doing any site visits, if they have to fly into Oregon for any reason, if they have to go anywhere, really, if they're traveling anywhere, it should be on that direct expense tab. Make sure that the state's current mileage reimbursement rate is correct. And I believe, what site is that on, Whitney? My brain's not working right now.
For all these different costs, the Oregon Accounting Manual has a lot of that information. Yeah. And this checklist is from our ODOT page, but the certification user group, we updated the checklist, and it actually references the Oregon Accounting Manual now. And then the Oregon Accounting Manual references GSA for any time that anytime you need to look at it.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, you'll be able to bounce that off of the mileage rates off of there, and you can verify if it's correct. In this case, yeah, it doesn't really. Well, it kind of shows it 382 miles round trip from Roseburg to Bend. You'd see something similar to that. Sometimes they'll put the mileage rate, so like 51 cents or 52 cents a mile, that type of thing. Yeah. So here you go, right there, 57.5 is how much it is for a total of 382 miles. Gets calculated for 219.65 cents for mileage. So yeah, it's just spot checking, making sure that they're putting in the correct information. Airfare, car rental, make sure, yeah, you're double checking that. Check the compensation exhibit of the contract or price agreement for limitations. There may be some limitations in regards to airfare or car rental, which is why you want to bounce that off your contract. Equipment rentals and other direct costs, same thing. Check your price agreement, check your contract. Oregon Accounting Manual, as Whitney has put into the checklist, is your friend for other direct costs. They have allowable and unallowable costs. Water bottles, unallowable. You can't be charged for water bottles. Toilet paper, I've seen that before. That's not allowable. Just general things like that. So yeah, and let's see. Oh, and also to keep in mind, when this gets calculated, they have everything in here. They've properly done their work in this area. It's all going to get estimated here, and you're going to have the same for contingency tasks, similar to how we have it on the breakdown of cost tab. We've separated the direct expenses for both contingency and non-contingency here, for tracking purposes. And then way down at the bottom, you get your total non-contingency and contingency, which should match the total down here in your direct expenses. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that as they put their information here, this tab does not talk to this tab. So as you go through and you say, okay, this all looks good. This all looks good. Yep. Everything looks great. You'll go to this tab and there may be an erroneous amount of money. There could be, $6,000. Where'd that come from? And it does not come from this tab. They do not talk together. So you'll want to look at this, go to direct expenses for both, consultant, even sub-consultants have it too. Here, this one's for a sub-consultant, same thing. And you want to go down that list and see if we're being charged for anything for contingency and non-contingency. And you're just going to want to bounce it and say, okay, this is $10,000. This is $5,000. Let's check it out. Yep, everything looks good. And so that's how you verify if the direct expenses are more or less good to go. Are there any questions on that?
Not about that piece, but we do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So the first question that we had was whether we should use updated billing rates if there's an amendment. And the answer that I would say is yes. The agency has the ability to use updated rates after 12 months. That's what the contract template says. And at ODOT, we really do allow the firms to use their updated rates as soon as they come due in that 12-month period. But I believe the certified locals have a different practice where you use the overhead rate through the length of the project. And that's fine. The other state DOTs do that as well. But when it comes up for amendment, I would update the rate. Really, we are trying to reimburse as true to cost as possible. And that's what we're getting at with these direct rates and indirect rates, is we're looking at their actual costs. And so we want to get as close to their actual costs as possible. So when something's up for an amendment, if their costs have increased or even decreased, the overhead rates do go down sometimes, then that would save the entity, your agency, money. And that's what ODOT does as well. Just try to get as true to cost as possible. And then the question about the MBR, and David, I have to correct you just a little bit. We can go below what NBRs have. NBRs are built up of as true to their actual cost as possible, but most of these firms don't have the accounting structure set up just yet. But if we are able to negotiate them down from what we have approved, that's okay. Often these firms have maybe more than one employee filling a classification too, and so their direct labor rate might actually be a little bit lower, which would incur a lower negotiated billing rate. I don't very often see negotiated billing rates using a lower rate than what we have approved, but you are able to negotiate that down. One piece I would say is that for the overhead rate, we're technically not allowed to use a lower overhead rate. We can't force them to use one, but if they want to voluntarily use a lower overhead rate, and that's perfectly okay, we would just document it like we would anything else, and then we can use that lower overhead rate. Tiffany, do you have a question? And there's one more in the chat too, I think.
Yeah, I just a little follow-up. Those are great clarifications. On the rate revision, can you explain a little bit about how that impacts the not to exceed amount that's in the contract? Because just because they agree to receive and reimburse at a higher billing rate, what does that do with the not to exceed amount that's already been negotiated?
Right. That not to exceed amount is fixed. It's based on what was estimated the day that the contract was executed. And though they may have increased costs or they may want to pay their employees more, they can choose to do that, but they cannot impact their contract NTE. And so if they do start using their next year's escalated salary rates, the BOC accounts for that, but oftentimes they'll come back in and they'll pay their employees more. And so they'll get an updated escalated salary rate. Whether you have that information because you requested or not, I don't know. But oftentimes the firm will give more than a 3.5% raise. Like we've seen that over the last couple of years, firms have been giving more. And so they may be eating up that contract budget quicker. But we should not be increasing the contract not to exceed amount for billing rate purposes. Is that enough to answer the question, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Olaf, is your question related to this, or is it related to Rachel's regarding the when do you use escalated salary rate versus negotiated billing rate?
Yeah, you can go ahead and answer Rachel's. I just want to make sure I get in here before the end of the meeting.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay.
And I think we had a question from somebody up above about the direct salary rates too. So firms use a negotiated billing rate when they don't have enough accounting information to provide us their indirect cost rate. It's usually firms that are new to government work or they're just a new entity in general. The process was set up over a decade ago, and it's really just kind of like an alternative to what's legally required from the feds. And at ODOT, we try to graduate these firms as soon as we find that they can account for these costs and can provide an indirect cost rate. So the last few years, I've been working with a ton of smaller firms to get themselves graduated. We're going to try to move to a space where NBRs may no longer exist for these A&E type contracts. There's a program that Federal Highway pushed out that's called Safe Harbor, and that's something that I'm looking at promoting for ODOT. And essentially you'll come on with your direct labor rate and everyone will have an overhead rate. It's automatically applied as a set fixed rate for all new people until they can provide their actual accounting data. So really an overhead rate firm is provided by any firm that has that information, and then negotiated billing rate firms are for firms that really can't provide it. And we've gone through the process of walking them through the steps and they still can't provide that information. And so this alternative fits for them until they can. And then I'm going to go back up and see if I can't find the direct labor rate question. Somebody wants to say it. Oh, it was Olaf. Oh, I'm sorry. It was Olaf. Same person.
Well, my question is actually about salary rates. So with the ESR schedule, the way that I interact with those the most really is reviewing invoices. And I've been told that we're supposed to check those invoices and make sure that none of the salary rates exceed what's on that schedule. The issue that comes up pretty frequently is that it sounds like those schedules are created based on who the firms are actually employing at the time. And so that leaves out classifications. It leaves out steps that they may have within a classification. So it's very common that you'll get an invoice where they have salary rates for people that weren't included or steps that weren't included in that schedule. So I'm just wondering how that's supposed to be dealt with.
Well, within ODOT, if any classifications that are added that are new, or if they exceed what's already approved, they provide us an updated direct salary rate schedule, and then we issue an updated escalated salary rate schedule to the firm and to anyone that uses them. And in our processes, we only send out rate approval notices within ODOT, and then we save the files. I mean, we can definitely look towards alternative ways to trying to get you all this updated information as soon as it goes out so that you have it. But essentially, when you get the invoice, you should be saying, hey, I don't have this approved classification. Do you have a revised escalated salary rate schedule? If not, then you need to go work with the ODOT billing rate team to get that added. At ODOT, we wouldn't reimburse until it's included in the escalated salary rate schedule or their negotiated billing rate.
Okay, yeah, I mean, just to clarify, like a good example is, say there's like an engineer 3 and then an engineer 5. That implies that there is an engineer 4 classification. They just don't have someone employed in that classification at that time. So they will promote someone engineer 4, they'll hire someone. So it's not really a new classification, but it's just because it is based on who they actually have employed at the time, it leaves these gaps. So it sounds like we need to reach out to them whenever that comes up. Okay.
Correct. And that's what we do internally at ODOT too. It happens to us all the time.
I'm sure it does.
But yeah, reach out anytime. And the sooner that you have information, so if you're negotiating upcoming work and you know that in a classic, I know you're at the invoicing level, but if you have a project manager that knows that's coming up, have the firm reach out early so that they can get that done before it's time for invoicing.
Well, I am a PM. It's just,
oh, okay,
like I say,
there you go.
They will start their project with people at certain classifications, but then people get promoted or they get hired. So yeah,
And
I
that does
don't know
happen.
until I do not know this until I get the invoice. Yeah.
And I think that happens on our end too, really. Often firms don't know what they're going to use until they need to use it too. But that might be outreach that I need to do, is that if you're using a new classification that you don't have approved yet, regardless of what entity you're working with, you better give us that information or you might not get reimbursed.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question.
True story. All right, were there any other outstanding questions? I think we're pretty close to the end of the document.
I have one question.
Oh, sure.
So on a typical project, when we have a consultant contract, we're reaching out to the ODOT billing rate update at odot.oregon.gov. I guess that's you guys, to get that spreadsheet. Are there any other requirements for like us to interact with you? Do we have to send you things for review, or it's more just like on the LPA to like manage that, keep stuff in their folders? We're just really reaching out for that update spreadsheet from you. Are there any other like touch points where we need to get review?
Nope. I mean, really, if you were going through an amendment, I think you might want to get updated rates, but I don't think, just really at time of execution, making sure you have what's approved with ODOT, and making sure that you're reaching out to get the most updated version. Because I know that like at ODOT, negotiations can take upwards of 6 months sometimes. So if you get them in the beginning of your 6 months, they may have changed by the end of your 6 months. So I would just double check at that point.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Tiffany, is there something else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, if you have questions, for sure, ask, either the certification program office or ask us to reach out to the procurement point of contact that we're working with. We work regularly with Whitney Scoville. David's available. We also have Joel Sire. He is on the line. Traditionally, over the last several years, we've worked with Kim Rice, but Kim Rice is on the glide path to retirement, and Joel Sire is going to be taking over for a lot of the work that Kim Rice used to do to support our certified local agencies around A&E and non-A&E consultant selection and contracting. So they'll be working with us. And then I just would say that in terms of compliance with the LPA A&E requirements guide and, following the requirements for certified agencies, Hannah Eastwood, the ODOT certification compliance coordinator, does do compliance reviews. So you'll want to make sure that you're maintaining your project files or your contract files consistent with the guidelines that are required. And there's a whole section on contract administration and guidance on billing rates and that type of thing. So there are reviews, but it's not necessarily a review that you need to move forward with the next step. It's just to maintain or demonstrate you've complied with the overall requirement. We've got 3 minutes left. Any more questions?
Well, I think we're pretty much at the bottom of the list anyways. Yeah, just at this point, BOC final review and follow-up. Make sure you're spot checking formulas. If you notify contract administrator if you have to about any discrepancies that you see. And the agency's contract administrator negotiates corrections and changes with the prime consultant. And that's it. Very simple. Very easy.
I would say spot checking the formulas is almost like a joke because they're all locked down and you can't actually touch any formulas, but
Pretty much. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If you try to make any changes to say like,
I love
any
it and I
escalation
hate
rate.
it.
Yeah,
Just so
see.
everybody knows, I probably hate it, but I love it too. It's just such a smart document.
So yeah.
Makes it so the consultants can't mess around with it is essentially why we locked it down in the first place, is so that we didn't have to go through and look at every single formula and make sure that they were totaling up right.
Exactly.
But it does make it complex when you're trying to enter in data and it says, no, you can't enter in data here. No, you can't do this. So yeah, but if you ever want another run through or anything, we're all here to support you. We have multiple team leads. David's on a team lead team, but we have lots of professionals that are in our office to help.
Definitely. And
Well,
I just want to add real quick. There are a lot of areas you could fill in information, and usually it's more than you need. If you need any more room, say for example, you have a project that's just humongous, or you need a lot of things like that. This is all locked down, as Whitney had said. Reach out to us, to the ODOT procurement office, and we can. There's ways that we can add more information into the box for you if you need it. So yeah. But there's a lot in there. I don't know. I don't think you will. But if you ever need to, just reach out to OPO and we'll take care of you.
Well, I want to say thank you to Whitney and David for joining this session, the Certification User Group Consultant Contracting Series. We've got several more sessions coming up. The next session, we're intending to go in more detail over the internal cost estimate. And there's a link in here to register. And then we have several more sessions in this series, negotiations, invoice reviews, and contract administration and closeout. Those are intended topics, although we may have to adjust timeline based on resourcing availability. I'd like to encourage you all to register and join those sessions. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.